everyone, and welcome back to our next session. We've got a great panel up next at the Healthspan Show, where we'll be discussing why sex stops at 50 is a load of nonsense and how to access the sexual wellbeing market for older adults. So as you've probably heard us say over the last couple of days, or this might be your first time joining us, we encourage as many questions or comments throughout the panels. Our panelists are here to answer live questions. So if you'd like to add any comments or questions, you can do that in the live chat that you can find at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. So that's enough for me. I'm going to hand over to Rachel Scherl. Rachel is the founder and CEO of Spark Solutions for Growth. Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here with everybody. I am delighted to be moderating today's Healthspan panel, which is titled, as you just heard, Why Sex Stops at 50 is a Load of Nonsense and How to Access the Sexual Wellbeing Market for Older Adults. We should have t-shirts that say that. The sexual wellbeing market and the conversation around it is finally getting some of the attention it deserves. Within that, the focus on sexual well-being and enjoyment over 50 is still lagging behind. When you combine the over 50 piece and the discomfort globally with talking about sexuality, you wind up in an interesting situation. So today we have the great opportunity to speak with founders, thought leaders, and change makers who are providing resources, building companies, and sharing the learning from their own experiences to change this in a meaningful way. I am a marketing strategist, a business builder, and a vagipreneur, a person in the business of female sexual and reproductive health. So I spend my days and nights talking and thinking and working with companies that are focused on this. So it's great to be here. I'd like to introduce you to our terrific panel, who are really global experts in different aspects of this. So thank you to everybody for being here at many different time zones. First, we have Adam Lewis, who is the CEO of Hot Octopus, which is described as the company with the people who design innovative, cutting-edge sex toys that not only look gorgeous, but also work with your body based on the fundamental belief that pleasure is a fundamental right for everyone. So I think everybody can get behind that statement. Thanks. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you very much.
Jackie Marshall-Cyrus, who's director of Jackie Marshall-Cyrus, which is a boutique consulting agency, which provides adult health and social care, age-related innovation, later life expertise, specializing in independent living systems and services, and the institutional long-term care sector. So actually speaking and working with the people in this space that we're talking about. Welcome, Jackie.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Elizabeth Gazda, Liz, who is the CEO of Ember Labs, which has wearable devices that deliver solutions around thermal comfort, which we'll talk about in some more detail, to improve sleep, reduce stress, and help balance the nervous system with a focus on the things that affect the menopausal population. Welcome, Liz. Thanks, everybody, for being here.
Great to be here.
So let's just jump right in and start with the big question for people who are listening and thinking that the 50 plus market is not interested in sex, sexual well-being, and pleasure. And luckily, we are all part of the wave that will redefine the sex essentials and the conversation we're having for the modern consumer, which certainly does include the 50 plus community. Certainly the menopausal community, which, as many of you know, will reach 1.1 billion people by 2025. So there's a lot of room here, a lot of room to grow. Jackie, I'm going to start with you. You live in the world of long-term care and older adults. What can you tell us about what you see in the communities? You're speaking with these people, you're working with them. What do they share, if anything, about sexual desire? Do they or their partners connect any of the changes they might be seeing to menopause or to age?
Okay, thank you. I think, with regards to the topic, I think we all know that's a bag of rubbish. I think everybody listening in will know that's a bag of rubbish. And I think we all know this, but I think what's important is that we need to say this, and we need to get this message out where it matters and to the people who can change, the narrative. And we all live, I guess I live in a world of long-term care and older adults, but I think actually we all do. We all live in a world of long-term care and older adults. There's no differentiation to be really made as we are part integral to society. So there's no other, there's no that world and our world. We are part of that world. It means the same thing to us. And that's where I think one of the challenges or the issues lie, that we see both components as being something distinctly different, that people who live in long-term care settings are outside of society, and that they themselves are a different set of beings, that they do not have sexual desires, they do not share the same things that we share, simply on the basis of their age. And I would like to think that when we talk about, sex over 50 does not stop, that we aren't talking about people in their 60s only, that we're talking about people in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and centenarians.
I'm sure there's a lot of applause for that.
I think we're embracing people throughout the life course. And I think we need to turn this conversation around, because for me, the intersectionality between sex, sexuality, and institutional care needs to be explored, and we need to raise the level of debate about that. Although, in my experience, the policy side of it has been recognized. You have the Royal College of Nursing guidance on sex, sexuality, and intimacy for people in care homes. You have the chief exec of our regulatory body, the Nursing and Midwifery Council, making very strong statements and saying that, for too long, sex and sexuality have been treated as taboo subjects in adult social care, and that nurses on the whole in the sector need to play a vital role in supporting people to safely explore and express their sexuality. So the rhetoric is there, but actually what happens in practice is a completely different thing. As I always say, reality is strategy for breakfast. Yeah. And we need to kind of, yes, the policy is there, but to actually enable this to happen in institutions is a very, very difficult task.
Well, just share an example of what some of the policies might be that could make this conversation easier or more broadly disseminated.
I think some of the policies need to recognize that sexuality and intimacy spans the life course. Yeah, a lot of them the policies tend to refer or link sexuality with sexually transmitted diseases. A lot of the policies, you'd find really, pathetic sort of linkages in saying things like, for older adults to boost their sexuality, you should get a haircut. There's actually a policy, a sort of statement from one of the leading aging charities saying that. So get a haircut, buy nice clothes. It's
and that's from a government regulatory body. Those are recommendations.
Government and leading charitable point of view. What I like is in Ireland, they have a national sexual health strategy. Yeah, in the UK, you hear we're still very fragmented, and it often tends to focus on pregnancy. Yeah, prevention of sexually transmitted diseases. When you're talking about things like that, you would assume that you're not talking about, because women after menopause, we don't have that, So I think they have adopted a broad life course approach from childhood, adolescence, middle life, and older age. So they recognize that.
Yeah, and we will come back to this, but the lack of education or the disparity of education.
So I really feel that the taboos still exist.
100%. So hopefully with conversations like this, Jackie, we'll start to break those down. But for anybody who's just joining, sex does not stop after 50, regardless of some of the silly recommendations we might hear. Adam, over to you. So Hot Octopus really talks about focusing on pleasure for everyone. You don't say, this is for, randy teenagers. Share what you've learned being in this space. Talk a little bit about Hot Octopus and what you've learned about what is similar and what is different. As Jackie pointed out, we sort of make this arbitrary cut after 50. And then there's another cut where we separate people even more by saying they're in institutional care. But I'm curious what you have learned. You speak with your customers. Should companies be looking at this 50 plus or older audience, or folks who aren't necessarily concerned about pregnancy or pregnancy prevention? Are they interested in different things? Are they asking you different things? And what kind of information are you sharing with them in that conversation?
Oh, thank you, Rachel. So yes, I'm Adam Lewis. I'm a founder of Hot Octopus, and we're a sex toy company. We invent and manufacture our own sex toys. And as a kind of an ethos, when we started the company, it really was that, we wanted to create a sex toy company that really was for everyone, that was completely inclusive. So that includes people with disabilities, it includes more senior folks, it includes people with people who are trans. And the whole mindset is that actually sexuality is such a broad topic, it encompasses such a broad spectrum. And then when we actually looked at what everyone else was doing in our space, actually this wasn't reflected in the way that these different companies were running their business and how they were focusing. And for us, from a commercial perspective, it was a bit of a, what's everyone doing out there? Because the market is so huge and everyone is focusing on this very niche aspect of sexuality, and that is, the 25 to 35 age group, maybe sort of bordering on the 40s, but it's tiny. And what we realized very quickly is actually the market is huge, and the over 50s market particularly is particularly huge. And what the reason that is one is what we discovered is those over 50 are incredibly interested in sex. And secondly, they're in a position twofold. One is usually when you get to your 50s and beyond, you have a little bit of cash. You could spend money on things that you want. Your kids, if you had them, have moved out. And, one is financially, you're in a position to be able to spend more money on yourself. Secondly is this age group itself is actually very sexually orientated. The reason again is distractions in their lives tend to be slightly less. You don't have the burdens of necessarily kids coming home, work. You can focus more on yourself and more on your partner. And this is very true in terms of the way that we've segmented the markets and where we derive our revenues from. And the over 50s market is absolutely huge for us. And it's such a great.
Can you give us a sense, Adam, if you were to look at your revenue from as under 50 or over 50 perspective?
No, absolutely. And I'm happy to share. I mean, it's slightly different for us because we really have actively targeted this sector, whilst a lot of businesses just won't. It'll be a tiny part of the business that's come in, not from activity, but simply because customers have found them. For us, we are very proactive. I would say up to 35% of our entire market is the over 50s market. And anyone who knows our brand, anyone who knows our products, you look at our website, and that would come as a little bit of a surprise, because it's not obvious that we focus specifically on the over 50s, and that's because as a business we try to exactly not do that. We don't focus on any segment in the way
which makes you more accessible potentially for a broader range.
So it's about expanding, not restricting. So when we look at how we talk to our different audiences, we make sure that there's content, that there's imagery, that there's products that are displayed that are relevant to everyone. So if you come onto our site, you'll see pictures of older people, you'll see pictures of younger people, you'll see pictures of trans people, you'll see pictures of people with disabilities. Because obviously, if you are over 50, you want to see people your own age. Because what does that tell you? They tell you it's relevant. What happens is with a lot of other businesses that they only show the glitzy 30 to 40, 25 to 40 age group. And of course, anyone in the over 50s who visits these sites is questioning whether or not the content and the products are actually designed for them or meant for them, only because there's nothing of relevance, nothing that they can identify with. So as a brand, what we try and do is make sure that we are completely inclusive. So there's a lot of similarities when you market to the over 50s to when, well, I say when one does, when we do. So a lot of the language we use is actually very similar. And what we tend to do is we have a very youthful approach with our language. And this is another thing, to be youthful, you don't have to be young. It's a state of mind. There's plenty of people in their 70s and 80s who are youthful. And that is the kind of language that youthful people want to identify with. So when we write content for, say, over the 50s, the language is still a youthful tone. The content might be slightly different and the imagery might be slightly different, but still, if you look at the imagery we use, we try and use youthful people. So you can be a youthful 70-year-old or, a dowdy 70-year-old. And as a brand, we chose to show imagery of youth at any age. And that's how, I guess, in terms of that we kind of make the content bespoke. Topics, of course, are very, very different. You get to over 50, your body changes. As a penis owner, as a male, our penises tend to not quite work as well as they used to do, and therefore we're looking for content that is relevant for what we're interested in.
That reflects that experience.
Exactly. It could be things around ED. It could be things that are just relevant to people's changing bodies, because that's the key thing. Isn't the mindset doesn't necessarily change as you get older, but one thing I can assure you from the feedback that we get is your body does. That's something you can't get away with. So whilst so like, for example, for older vulva owners, older women, we write content that's relevant. So as you get older, you go into perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, and these are topics that are interesting. So we write content about that, relevant to our audience, but again, written in a youthful way. We're not a medical company. We're not here to prescribe. We're here to generate pleasure from what you're looking at, and from that is our activity, to give pleasure, and therefore that's how we deliver the content. But yes, we would provide content around, issues such as vaginal dryness, about, also when you get to 50 plus, often if you've been with a partner for a long time, you've been with this partner for 50 odd, 30, 40 years. And therefore, you're not looking at sex toys necessarily to just for personal pleasure, but ways of spicing up your relationship. So in terms of tone, just to sum up, in terms of tone, the tone is completely uniform across our site. It's this youthful tone. Imagery, although obviously we provide imagery specific to a segment, in this case the older 50s, it has a youthful flavor to it. And the big difference is the content itself. That is very different. We write content and we position our products and the story around them relevant to each segment. But holistically, we see everyone as the same. We really don't.
So I want to jump off where you talked about the actual changes that happen that you can't avoid. You maybe can work on what your attitude is and your approach, but things do happen. So Liz, often when we talk about 50 plus, certainly when we're talking about vagina owners, we're talking about women who are in the early stages of perimenopause, in menopause, or postmenopausal. And at Embr, you really focus on benefits for menopausal women. I'm going to let you explain the technology, but around hot flashes, sleep, and many people are often surprised, maybe not on this panel, that there are literally dozens of other symptoms associated with menopause. Can you share a little bit? I know you come from the business side as opposed to the medical side, but what is actually happening in the bodies of menopausal women, often whom are over 50 plus, that cause some of those symptoms, and specifically how some of those changes result in a declining desire?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Rachel. For anyone who's unfamiliar with Ember Labs, we produce this device. It's a wearable device that heats up and cools down. And by applying thermal sensation to the body on the inside of the wrist, we're able to dampen down the override of the sympathetic nervous system. So what most people don't understand is that many of the menopausal symptoms that women experience, so hot flushes, if we're in the UK, hot flashes in the US, anxiety and insomnia, they're all caused by an overactivation of the sympathetic nervous system. And if you remember from science class, that means that you're in a state of fight or flight. So you can imagine what this does to your sex drive. If you're in a constant state of fight or flight, you're not really thinking about how to get it on, so to speak. So our technology has been adopted by over 75,000 women around the world who use the technology to dampen down those menopausal symptoms in a natural way by harnessing their own body. What we found, Rachel, when we put this device on the market 3 years ago, is that nobody was talking about menopause at the time. It was kind of a taboo word, and it wasn't something very sexy. Today, this subject is real. You see it all over the press, and that's because there will be 1.1 billion women in menopause by 2025. Now, what I see is the most interesting shift, and I'm going to riff on something that Adam said, is that Generation X, who this is the population that's in menopause right now globally, they really see themselves as the perennial generation. So I don't know if you've heard that term coined before. So Adam, you said youthful, we say perennial, because Gen Xers are not going to go into the aging process like their grandmothers did. They are youthful, they are fit, they are in many cases more fit than the millennial generation. And this is going to be a beautiful process for them. So as we see Gen X lead the charge in how they address aging and menopause, this is going to be a natural path laid down for the millennials, which we know is the largest population coming into menopause. What we see in talking to the community of women that have purchased the Embr Wave is they want to age in a way that is very classy, that is youthful, and sex is very much part of that.
But one of the interesting things from the work that I've done in menopause, and you bring up a very good point, and the pandemic and this idea of a rising tide raising all boats, all these discussions were like centuries in the making, and it feels like they're an overnight sensation given what we hear now. But one of the major issues is the disruption of sleep that is caused by hot flashes. Do you see a connection between improved sleep and improved desire?
Oh, absolutely. Because when you don't get enough sleep, your cortisol levels go up, right? And so you get this fluctuation of cortisol, and estrogen is flowing with that. That creates so much disruption to desire. And so just getting a good night's sleep is very important for sexuality as a kind of fundamental building block of health. So we see that, again, if you can dampen down that override of the sympathetic nervous system and get some sleep and prevent those hot flashes, you're going to be in a much better position, so to speak, to to attack the day with a sense of sexuality.
Great, thank you. Well, working in the space requires a great deal of creativity and boundary breaking, as you all know. In some cases, as Jackie mentioned, you're fighting against, regulatory bodies who are saying things like get a haircut to improve your sex life, which is, as many things as I've heard. I've been in this space for a long time. That could be one of the all-time winners of ridiculous. But there are a lot of issues, creating the conversation that people aren't comfortable with. We talk about taboo, I hope we live long enough so that we're never using the word taboo to talk about issues that affect, 50% of the population. But the reality is there are challenges in lots of different aspects of this business, including around where you can communicate and where you can have the conversation. So Adam, I'm so excited to talk about this because I have been fighting this for about 15 years myself, is many companies have faced roadblocks and still do to advertising on a broad range of media channels, including Facebook and Instagram. There's all kinds of different reasons. People get responses to their ad submission that the content is too sexual in nature, which seems to not apply to erectile dysfunction, but does include female pleasure. So that's a whole nother panel we'd have to have. but you had as a company, a huge breakthrough at Hot Octopus, and you were able to be the first, if I understand it, the first company to get sex toy ads into The Guardian. So for those who are listening around the globe, describe how seminal The Guardian is in terms of an information source and what you did to break that barrier.
Yes, it was quite a success for us. I mean, for those of you who don't know The Guardian, it's a British broadsheet. It's been around for over 100 years. One of the best well-known newspapers, and an incredibly highly regarded paper. So for us to get a full-page advert for one of our products, which again there was lots of censorship and how we could actually put that forward and what that needed to look like, but nonetheless. We were the first sex toy company ever to get a full-page advert in a broadsheet. And yes, look, some of it was down to our brilliance, I won't lie, but a lot of it is down to, honestly, it's just, it's the right place at the right time, and the world is changing.
Absolutely.
That's an absolute fact. And actually the pandemic itself, and the fact that people are being at home and people realizing that, you know, human sexuality has become much more in the fore over the last year and a half. When people are at home, people are more interested in sexuality, and this is a fact. If you look at what people are searching for, if you look at what articles are being read and being shared, you know, sex and sexuality and intimacy has become a very popular topic. And
if you look at the businesses like yours who are in the space reporting double-digit, triple-digit growth, it's not just the articles, it's not just the conversation, but people are actually voting with their pocketbook, if you will, and they're buying products that enhance pleasure in much greater numbers.
Absolutely. And look, the Guardian, despite being very, very sort of old in terms of years, is also actually quite progressive. As newspapers go, and we believe it or not, we've already had quite a long-standing close relationship with the Guardian, because we're an activist brand, and that means that we're not just a website that sells sex toys. We drive content, we talk about issues, we like to discuss. We put a lot of content out, and you know, we feel very strong about the need for inclusivity, including people over 50s, and just, you know, within the sort of sexual content and context. And this is something that we've been very vocal about. And so we've worked with the Guardian certainly very closely over the last year and a half around content around sex and sexuality and intimacy.
So for people who are listening, it's a process. It's not just you submit once. For those people who are on the previous panel, you know, it's not just reach out once. This is a long-term investment of you, if you will, in changing the conversation.
Well, exactly that. And we've been working with the Guardian. You know, we produce a lot of content them for their sex and love section. You know, we've had long discussions with the editorial team about what content that they would like to put forward, what they, you know, what they're able to, and so we've had a close relationship with the Guardian, and we were meant to actually produce a piece of content for them, and we were in discussions with the editor, and you know, the editor felt that it was the right time for their audience to put forward an advert such as the one that we created. And it was just the right time and the right place. As I said, you know, the Guardian, you know, they know their market, they know what people are reading and what articles are popular, and it so happens to be sex and sexuality. So, you know, so they were ready to make that next step. And as I said, I'm not sure they'd have done it with any brand. The fact is we have heritage with them, in the sense that, you know,
right.
We know that, you know, we provide content. We're thought leaders to some extent around this topic. If you look at the amount of content and the amount of people that drive content from the Hot Octopus universe, we have a lot of experts writing some really, I mean, I say pioneering stuff, not because it's pioneering, because no one else is writing about it, or it's not being published, not because what we're saying is necessarily pioneering. A lot of it is kind of the bleeding obvious. It's just about putting it forward and people being receptive to it. So right time in the right place with the Guardian. They were happy to take the advert, and funnily enough, since then, and this is what happens, is now the Independent have been in touch with us. They want us to put an advert in.
Well, no one wants to be first, but once you break open the barrier, then it's
exactly
much easier.
that. So we've got 2 or 3, and look, it needs to be the right fit, you know, because at the end of the day, people are going from the Guardian advert to our website, and there needs to be correlation in terms of, you know, what
Absolutely.
their readers are looking for and hoping to find to what we're presenting on the site. And therefore that match was there. And yeah, we're incredibly proud. Yeah, it's definitely, for the industry, always nice to come first and to do something, because the industry is evolving so quickly. The mindset of the world is changing very quickly, and to be at the forefront of these things and pushing boundaries is what the brand is all about. And it's just
And what so many people in this space are all about. You become actually a boundary pusher by virtue of entering the space. So Jackie,
and the great thing is the world, we have a tailwind. We're not doing this against the tide, we're doing it with the tide. So we're
which is a nice change over the past few years.
So nice. So
Jackie, your communication tends to be, if I understand what you do, is you're not talking about advertising, you're having conversations with regulatory bodies, you're having conversations with people who are living in institutional care settings and running them. What have you done to help people become more comfortable and realize that these are conversations that need to happen, so that you're not using, ancient values and perspectives to talk about a modern population and some of the challenges they might be facing?
Given my career, I've had to voice my experience, my concerns, voice my vision for a different sort of conversation. I've been a nurse for over 37 years. I've worked in our National Health Service. I presently work as well in our adult health and social care sector. I've worked in nursing education, and I've also worked in the business innovation sector. So I think when I first started working in the NHS way back in 1999 in the UK, the conversation around sexuality, older adults, sex, it was like oil and water. And you would think that you would hear staff talking about it, colleagues talking about it, because the setting was an intermediate care unit, which is a setting between hospital and home. So preparation for discharge. And the conversation, the topic, was something the adults themselves were open and honest about, as opposed to the staff. The staff was still very reticent about it. And I remember speaking to a woman, very quintessential English lady, with her pearls and all sorts, and just having a chat with her. And I said, she was telling me about her husband, that he had passed away. So I said, what do you miss most about not having him not being here? And she said to me, I missed him. What I miss most about him were the fantastic and amazing orgasms he gave me. Yeah, and
now that's a fun day at work, as far as I'm concerned.
And if another member of staff had said that, they would have, it would have been all around the ward at the time. Oh my God, she said this, and then there was another instance in another unit, and this was a Nigerian gentleman. So the point I want to make is that it's across the board. It crosses ethnicity, everything. Sexuality does that, and sex does that. And this Nigerian gentleman, I was the ward manager of this unit, and he quietly, came in for management of his diabetes and so on. And he came to me quietly and handed me this appointment letter. And he said, sister, I have this appointment and I'd really love to keep it. And when I looked at the letter, it was an appointment for assessment for a penile implant. And I'm telling you about a man in his 70s. Yeah. And at first I thought to myself, oh my God, these African men, they just won't let it go, But then when you look back, you recognize that inherently we too have ageist attitudes and poor perspectives. And that, the staff, at handover, you say things like these and it's a joke. Yeah, it's a joke. It's for comedic value. People start to think, oh my God. And he actually became characterized by that. Instead of using his name, they would say, oh, the man who wants the penile implant, and that's the sort of scenario that existed at that time. And the tendency tends to be for us, we kind of project onto adults, older adults, and say that, well, it's embarrassing to them or they won't feel comfortable with it. The fact is, it's us. We are embarrassed and we don't feel comfortable about it. So we project onto them. And we're quite happy to be part of this very pervasive sexual world. We would sit and laugh and be very open, listen to a stand-up comedian, make the most explicit sex jokes and share it with our friends and family. Yet to ask somebody, what is your sexual orientation? How can we help you? We're very difficult and challenged by that. And institutions, and in long-term care institutions, it's where we need to get much further than where we are now. Yeah, as I said, it's still taboo despite the policy and guidance, and even in how they articulate the sexual. It's very medicalized, it's very clinical and sterile. So when we're talking about issues, it's often negative psychosexual problems. It's often
rather than enjoyment or pleasure.
Enjoyment. You would not hear people say sex toys. You would see in the policy documents sex adjuncts. What is that?
Where do you buy a sex adjunct?
Yes, and that adults can participate in leisurely sexual activity. So we really need to have a change. And I firmly believe that when I worked in nursing education as well, it was not part of the curriculum. I was a module leader at an educational institution for nursing, a faculty.
And we hear that, Jackie, we hear that over and over again.
Yeah.
That so many companies in this space are stepping up to provide education because it's so lacking.
And I took the lead to add sex and sexuality in later adulthood to the curriculum. And my colleagues, my lecturer colleagues, they were like, oh my God, are you mad? What's the dean going to say about this? So it was a mixture of intrigue, fascination. But I can tell you, the day that I walked into that auditorium to give that lecture, there was not enough space for me to walk through. My colleagues lined and it was the first time we had such full attendance. Initially, the students were giggly but eventually they came down to asking very serious, inquiring questions because it was fascinating to them and they wanted to find out.
Just in the interest of time, I'm just going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the data side of it, which is how do we learn about this population? How are we, in addition to having one-on-one or 1-on-100 group conversations in education, information sources are starting to explode, and reaching your target consumer gets more complex and in some ways simpler at the same time. So I'm curious for you, Liz, separate from having the conversation, but almost listening to the behavior that's going on, how are you capturing data? How much are you getting, and what is it helping you learn about what this population, and we'll call it for the purposes of the name of this panel, 50 plus, as it relates to interest in sexuality, desire, vaginal dryness, those kinds of things. So it's a two-part question. How are you creating the data? How much data are you collecting? And then how are you analyzing that to get insights about this area?
Yeah, because the device is so life-changing for menopausal women, and they're wearing it every day and using it through the day and the night, it has a companion app. And through that companion app, we ask women, what are the other symptoms that you're experiencing, or what is your quality of life like through menopause? And so as they're interacting with the app and the device, we are able to get qualitative data in the form of surveys or symptom tracking from these women. And then we can correlate that with the actual usage data. And what we're learning is that there's a whole host of symptoms on the one hand and desires for a different way to live. And so we probably have, Rachel, one of the most comprehensive qualitative and quantitative data sets on what we call primetime women in the world. We only sell the product in the United States for the time being, but the product has made its way into 170 countries around the world, which really speaks to the desire to have this type of natural solution. And so we're starting to collect some really amazing data on this particular segment. I wanted to just wrap up the conversation from my side about something that happened to me recently that I found to be very profound, which is I went to a kind of swanky wellness resort outside of Boston for the weekend. And they had a very nicely curated gift shop with leisure wear to work out and do your yoga and books. And there was a whole shelf dedicated to sex toys, soft porn, and lube. And I thought, wow, things are really changing when you see these types of products just right out on the shelf next to the high-end chocolate.
Which is pretty amazing. We're going to get to questions in a minute, but I wanted to just do a quick roundup and ask each of you if there was one thing you could tell your customers or investors or buyers or regulatory agencies. What is one thing you want people to understand about this population as it relates to sexual activity that you don't think they know? Or if they know, they've heard it once and they need to hear it 100 times. So Liz, I'll start with you. What do you wish people understood about menopausal women and sexuality, or people 50 plus and sexuality?
I would love for especially investors to understand that women's health and women's desire is not a niche market. We're actually 50% of the population, and many of our issues and desires outpace those of men's. And so this is a lucrative market to be investing in.
Great. Jackie, how about you? What do you wish people, I know you're saying these things all the time. What do you wish if you could stand on and shout from a street corner, or have it in a billboard, or flying connected to an airplane? What would you like people to be thinking about and be aware of as it relates to sex after 50, sex in institutional care settings?
I would like to say two things. I would like to let people know that sexuality remains a fundamental aspect of human beings throughout their life, and it's a fundamental right to be able to express that sexuality. It's enshrined in the World Health Organization's sexuality rights for human beings. It is our right. The second thing I would like to say is to people is that there's a whole sexual revolution taking place in plain sight. And we think that we need to inform people that it might be the opposite, that we need to be informed as to what is actually going on, in terms of the internet. When you look at, it has afforded a level of anonymity and liberty to people to practice and experience and express their sexuality. So, it's still shrouded. The old adage, no sex, please, we're British. I think we've gone way past that. And there's a whole world of sexuality out there that the sex industry and the internet is facilitating for adults. And once we have that power, we will continue to use it.
Thank you so much. And Adam, how about you? What do you wish people knew? And what's nice about this group is no one is bashful. You're saying these messages all the time in the various environments in which you're in. But what is the one thing you wish that people understood?
Where to start?
Right, that's a whole nother panel, right?
Yeah, look, there's a couple of things here. And I think, look, the world is learning. Sex is no longer seedy. Sex is not something that you discuss only behind closed doors, and you don't discuss with your friends, and you don't discuss with your children, and you don't discuss with your family, and you don't discuss with your grandparents. It's a load of nonsense. And the reason is there's been so many studies now between sex, intimacy, and mental health, and the clear correlation between the two. Yet, and the world is getting better. We don't like to necessarily recognize this, and it is so true that we need to change our mindset towards sexuality and see this as an absolutely fundamental part of mental well-being. And that goes all the way up to your last day on this earth. If you are sexually happy, depending on what your inclination is, you're going to be mentally more happy.
And it's such an important point. One of the things that we've seen during COVID to that point is the conversation is veering towards understanding the intersections. You can't talk about, as you said, sexual health without talking about mental health. You can't talk about most anything without connecting it to mental health. So that awareness of how these things go together has become increasingly prominent and important.
Absolutely. And obviously, as someone who makes products, you need the media, you need the world of communication to buy into this, and not to constantly censor us at every opportunity. And as we've seen it with The Guardian, we are going the right way. And the second thing I'd like to tell the world is anyone who thinks that sex stops at the age of 50 must be absolutely nuts. Because I tell you, whoever's saying this, when you get to 50 or 52 or 55 or 60, let's see if you still share that opinion. It is one of those ridiculous concepts that I mean, it's just so ridiculous. It's hard to even comment on it, because sexuality really does not end. And in fact, 60 or 70-year-olds who are having sex are going to be happier generally than those who don't.
And that's actually scientifically proven. There's a lot of data that says people who are sexually active, they live longer, they feel better, they sleep better, they have better cardiovascular health. There's so many positive advantages. So, but that's again a whole nother discussion.
It's not seedy, it's sexual health.
So we only have a couple of minutes. I think Jade is going to come in and give us the hook, but I did want to address, there are questions coming in. This goes back to a little bit earlier in the conversation. And I think it relates, Adam, specifically to what you talked about with the experience with The Guardian. As we know, as many of us know, it's very difficult to get advertising and promotional messages out on social media without being censored. We've talked about that. You can't find an entrepreneur in this space who hasn't experienced that. So given how difficult it is to even reach the younger market, which is where lots of companies think the money is, where can you effectively and efficiently meet this older market? Where can you find them? Where can you communicate with them? And I would open the question to everybody, but the general idea is, how do you get these important messages out to the populations that you're interested in? Where are they getting their information sources? And how do you overcome the fact that you're prevented from speaking about this to any population on a number of media channels?
Yeah, if I'm allowed to go first. I mean, obviously,
yes.
I deal with this every day and the challenges. And actually, it is a really tricky industry to be able to promote and to be able to get messages across. We've taken a lot of it into our own hands. We drive a lot of the content. For example, on our website, we have a senior sex hub, which is content dedicated purely to whoever want to consider themselves in that bracket. And we have a wonderful lady called Joan Price, who I think is now in her early 80s, who is our senior sexpert. And she constantly writes content for us. She has like an agony aunt section where you can write in with questions, and Ask Joan, we call it. So we've taken a lot of the matters into our own hands to be the information source where people now come to us. And as I said, we drive a lot of content. Joan writes a lot about different topics, and we put it out there. And those channels that are able tend to want to pick this stuff up. So you'll see us constantly being interviewed by different papers, by different, a lot of it is editorial content rather than advertising content. And that's what really seems to cut through. Advertising is very, very difficult. Educational content, however, seems to be easier to position. So that is generally how we do that. And yes, Instagram, Facebook, forget them. Not a chance. But there are lots of channels that you can get through by providing really good educational content that then drives back to our products and our websites and our own channels.
Liz and Jackie, any closing thoughts on that before we wrap up?
Go ahead, Liz. Go ahead.
Please.
I just wanted to say that I think influencers, the new trend for influencers, people need to speak out. We need to talk about this. We ourselves need to find the platforms to talk about it. Again, that mismatch, that dissonance between, policy and what happens in practice. I think, and we need to speak about it in realistic terms, because for me, my experience has been there's no information for people who are a segment of the population living in particular settings. There's no information. It doesn't seem to be relevant to them. And you know, coming out of my experience, we put a level of enforced celibacy on people. Yeah, when there's so much out there, and innovators, Adam and his team being a significant, a singular exception, really, are not understanding that this is a life course issue. And the space for innovation is so huge, you know, but companies will see it, oh, that's a left field kind of thing. Right. You know, they're not coming into it, but the opportunity is tremendous. And I say hail to Adam and his team for breaking through that ceiling.
Jackie, don't tell everyone. Don't tell everyone, we'll get out of business. Okay.
And Liz, any final comments?
I just think that across the board, with longevity being what it is today, and the growth in the silver population, and also new science around epigenetics, I would really like to just see more discussion around the health and well-being and inclusion of older people in general.
Well, thank you.
They're a very important part of our population that have been really sidestepped.
Absolutely. Well, they won't be for long, thanks to the three of you. So thank you to Liz, Jackie, and Adam for sharing your expertise. You know, any day where I get to talk to smart people about sexual health is a great day at the office for me. Thank you for Healthspan. Thank you to Healthspan for creating this panel around this topic. And if we were to summarize in one sentence, does sex stop after 50? The answer is a resounding absolutely not.
Thank you,
Great.
Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for the great moderation, and thank you to all our panelists joining us here today. Because it was kind of noticed and commented multiple times on the panel, this is an important topic to kind of bring to everyone at Healthspan today, and great that we were able to have that discussion. So thank you all for joining us. Just so everyone knows, we do have the Ask the Investor sessions starting shortly, which is focusing on women's health and also sexual health. So please make sure you join that session in the next 10 minutes to kind of get your burning questions asked to some of the really interesting investors in the space. And we'll see you again shortly. Thank you. Bye.